Tell me about a time miscommunication caused an issue. Introduction. This is a common behavioral interview question for software developers, backend developers, full-stack developers, senior developers, and team leads. Interviewers ask this question to understand: Colin, how you respond when communication fails. Colin, whether you take responsibility for misunderstandings. Colin, how you correct an issue without blaming others. Colin, how you communicate with developers, QA, and product owners. Colin, how you resolve conflicting assumptions. Colin, how you improve communication processes. Mistakes. This question is especially important for Java developers, backend developers, Spring Boot developers, full-stack developers, senior software developers, team leads, agile teams, cross-functional teams. The best way to answer this question is by using the STAR method. STAR means S. Situation, explain the background. T. Task, explain your responsibility. A. Action, explain what you personally did. R. Result, explain the final outcome. A good interview answer usually spends at 10% situation, 10% task, 60% action, 20% result. The most important part is the action section, because interviewers want to understand how you corrected the misunderstanding, communicated professionally, and prevented the same issue from happening again. Question: tell me about a time miscommunication caused an issue. Example 1. Misunderstanding an API requirement situation. In one sprint, I worked on a customer profile update API. The requirement listed several profile fields, but did not clearly state that one field could be updated only by administrators. I assumed that all authenticated users could update it, while the product owner expected it to be restricted. Task. When QA identified the difference, I needed to clarify the intended behavior, correct the implementation, and make sure the misunderstanding did not affect the release. Action. I avoided blaming the product owner or the story description. I acknowledged that I should have asked for clarification before implementing the authorization rule. I arranged a short discussion with the product owner, QA, and front-end developer. We clarified which fields normal users could update, which fields were admin only, what the front-end should display, what response unauthorized users should receive, whether audit logging was required. I updated the acceptance criteria so the decision was documented. Then, I changed the backend implementation by adding check admin role authorization, check service layer permission checks, check forbidden response for normal users, check audit logging, checks for admin and non-admin users. I also worked with the front-end developer to make sure the field was read only for normal users. Result: the issue was corrected before production. QA verified the role behavior successfully. Afterward, I began using a role permission checklist for stories involving sensitive fields or admin functions. Why this answer works. This answer is strong because it shows accountability, almost requirement clarification, security awareness, product owner and QA collaboration, corrective action, process improvement. Example 2. Front-end and back-end used different field names situation. In one full-stack project, the front-end and back-end teams developed a search feature in parallel. The API contract had been discussed verbally, but the exact response field names were not documented. The back-end returned customer status, while the front-end expected status. Task. The mismatch caused integration failure, and I needed to coordinate a quick resolution without delaying the sprint. Action. I reviewed the front-end request and back-end response with the other developer. We confirmed that both implementations were reasonable, but we had relied on a verbal understanding instead of a documented contract. I took responsibility for not publishing a sample response earlier. We held a short contract review and confirmed. Check field names, data types, required and optional fields, pagination fields, empty result behavior, date format, validation error structure. I updated the backend DTO to match the agreed contract. I also published sample request and response JSON through our open API documentation. We added an integration test to verify the response structure. For future features, we agreed to confirm the API contract before front-end and back-end development started. Result: the integration issue was resolved quickly. The feature was completed within the sprint. Documenting contracts early reduced similar integration problems in later stories. Why this answer works. This answer is good because it shows dot. Check front-end back-end collaboration. Check shared accountability. Check API contract management. Check quick problem resolution. Check documentation improvement. Check prevention of repeat issues. Example 3. Miscommunication about a QA environment deployment situation. In one sprint, I completed a backend feature and told QA that the code was ready for testing. I meant that the development work and code review were complete. QA understood that the feature had already been deployed to the QA environment. They began testing and reported that the feature was unavailable. Task: I needed to clarify the deployment status and improve how readiness was communicated. Action: I apologized for using the unclear phrase, ready for testing. I explained that the code had been merged, but the QA deployment was still pending. I coordinated with the release team to confirm the deployment time and shared the exact status with QA. I began using more specific status updates. Check development complete. Check pull request approved. Code merged. Deployment scheduled. Deployed to QA. Smoke testing complete. Ready for QA testing. I also updated the ticket with the environment name, deployment version, and test URL. The team later included these statuses in its definition of ready for QA. Result: QA resumed testing after the correct version was deployed. The sprint was not significantly delayed. Clearer deployment terminology prevented similar confusion in future releases. Why this answer works. This answer is strong because it shows close ownership of unclear wording, close QA collaboration, close deployment awareness, close process standardization, close practical improvement, close no blame. Example 4. Misunderstanding a business date rule situation. In one project, I implemented a daily transaction report. The business team said the report should include transactions for each day, but we did not explicitly clarify which time zone defined the business day. I implemented the report using UTC, while the business expected the local business time zone. Task: the difference caused incorrect totals for transactions near midnight. I needed to correct the calculation and restore confidence in the report. Action: I met with the product owner, business analyst, and QA to understand the expected calculation. I created examples showing how the same transaction could fall on different dates in UTC and the business time zone. We clarified caps, business time zone, inclusive start and end dates, records near midnight, daylight saving time behavior, canceled transaction handling, empty result behavior. I documented the confirmed calculation rules. Then I updated the backend date conversion and filtering logic. I added regression tests for transactions near midnight, month-end records, daylight saving time changes, inclusive end dates, normal daytime records. I also reviewed other reports for similar assumptions. Result: the report totals became accurate. The business team confirmed the corrected results. Afterward, time zone and date boundary rules became required questions during report refinement. Why this answer works. This answer is good because it shows capital business rule clarification, time zone awareness, accountability, regression testing, stakeholder collaboration, broader prevention. Example 5. Miscommunication about sprint scope situation. During one sprint, the product owner mentioned additional dashboard filters during a discussion. The development team interpreted them as required for the current sprint. The product owner intended them as ideas for a future enhancement. Developers began working on the extra filters, which put the original sprint goal at risk. Task: I needed to clarify the scope and help the team refocus on the agreed sprint commitment. Action: I brought the product owner, Scrum Master, QA, and developers together for a short discussion. We reviewed Original story, committed acceptance criteria, newly discussed ideas, remaining sprint capacity, QA testing time, impact on the sprint goal. The product owner confirmed that the advanced filters were not required for the current release. We updated the existing story to show the committed scope clearly. We created a separate backlog item for the future filters. I also suggested that future scope discussions end with an explicit statement such as, "This is included in the current sprint," or "This is a future backlog item." Result: the team stopped unnecessary work and returned to the original sprint goal. The committed feature was delivered on time. The team became more disciplined about documenting scope changes. Why this answer works. This answer is strong because it shows scope clarification, agile communication, team alignment, avoiding blame, backlog management, protection of the sprint goal. Example 6. Miscommunication with another team about API availability situation. Our service depended on an API owned by another internal team. During planning, we understood that their endpoint would be available early in the sprint. Their team meant that the API design would be ready, not that it would be deployed to the QA environment. This misunderstanding blocked integration testing. Task: I needed to clarify the dependency, keep development moving, and reduce the release impact. Action: I contacted the downstream team and clarified the difference between contract readiness and environment availability. We confirmed API contract completion date, development environment availability, QA deployment date, authentication requirements, sample test data, expected error responses, support contacts. I shared the clarified timeline with our product owner, Scrum Master, QA, and developers. While waiting for the endpoint, I created a mock implementation based on the confirmed contract. This allowed us to complete client development, request mapping, response mapping, timeout handling, error handling, unit testing. We also created a dependency checklist that separated API design readiness from environment deployment readiness. Result: development continued while the external endpoint was being prepared. Once the endpoint became available, integration testing was completed quickly. The checklist prevented similar cross-team misunderstandings later. Why this answer works. This answer is good because it shows cross-team communication, dependency management, mitigation planning, mock-based development, timeline clarification, process learning. Example 7. Miscommunication during a production deployment situation. In one release, the development team believed the database migration would run automatically as part of application deployment. The release team expected the migration script to be executed manually before deployment. The difference was discovered shortly before the production release. Task: I needed to stop the deployment, clarify ownership, and create a safe execution plan. Action: I raised the issue immediately, rather than allowing the deployment to continue based on assumptions. I brought together the developers, database administrator, QA, and release manager. We clarified 1. Who would run the migration? 2. When the migration would run, required database backup, validation queries, expected migrated record count, application deployment order, smoke testing responsibilities, rollback ownership. I documented the deployment sequence. Confirm backup, apply schema changes, execute migration script, validate record counts, deploy application, perform smoke tests, monitor errors and performance. We rehearsed the sequence in a lower environment before proceeding. Result: the production deployment completed safely. The team avoided an application failure caused by missing database changes. Future release plans included explicit owners for every manual deployment step. Why this answer works. This answer is strong because it shows production responsibility, immediate escalation, release coordination, database migration awareness, ownership clarification, prevention of a serious incident. Example 8. Miscommunication during code review situation. In one pull request, a reviewer left a comment saying a validation method should be simplified. I interpreted that as shortening the code. The reviewer actually meant consolidating duplicate validation rules into a reusable component. I changed the method, but the reviewer said the main concern had not been addressed. I needed to clarify the feedback and update the implementation correctly. Action. Instead of continuing through written comments, I arranged a short conversation with the reviewer. I asked them to explain the maintainability concern and show which duplicate rules they had noticed. We reviewed the code together and agreed that the real issue was duplication across several services. I updated the implementation by check, creating a shared validator, moving common rules into one location, preserving service-specific rules, adding unit tests, updating affected services, running regression tests. I also summarized the agreed approach in the pull request, so other reviewers had context. Afterward, I started asking for clarification when review comments could have multiple interpretations. Result. The pull request was approved with a cleaner and more maintainable design. The duplicate validation was removed. The experience improved how I handled ambiguous written feedback. Why this answer works. This answer is good because it shows code review communication, willingness to clarify, maintainability improvement, collaboration, learning from misunderstanding, respectful resolution. Best short answer version. If you need a short interview answer, you can say, in one full-stack project, the front-end and back-end teams were developing a customer search feature in parallel. We had discussed the API response verbally, but we had not documented the exact field names. The back-end returned a field named customer status, while the front-end expected status. This caused the integration to fail. I took responsibility for not publishing a sample response before development started. I arranged a short discussion with the front-end developer and QA, and we confirmed the field names, data types, pagination fields, empty result behavior, and error response format. I updated the backend DTO to match the agreed contract, published sample requests and responses through OpenAPI, and added an integration test to verify the response structure. As a result, the integration issue was resolved quickly, and the feature was completed within the sprint. After that, our team reviewed and documented API contracts before front-end and back-end development started. Common mistakes to avoid. 1. Blaming another person. Bad answer. The product owner did not explain the requirement properly. Better answer. The requirement allowed different interpretations, and I should have clarified it before implementing. 2. Pretending you are not part of the problem. Bad answer. The front-end developer used the wrong field name. Better answer. We relied on a verbal agreement and had not documented the API contract clearly. 3. Choosing a major, careless mistake. Bad answer. I ignored several warnings and caused a serious production outage. Better answer. Choose a manageable communication issue that you corrected professionally and learned from. 4. Fixing only the immediate issue. Bad answer. I changed the field name and moved on. Better answer. I fixed the field name, documented the contract, added an integration test, and changed our contract review process. 5. No learning. Bad answer. The issue was resolved. Better answer. I learned to confirm important assumptions in writing and use specific status terminology. Best practices for answering this question. Use the STAR method. Choose an honest but manageable example. Explain what was misunderstood. Take appropriate responsibility. Avoid blaming others. Clarify the expected behavior. Correct the immediate issue. Document the decision. Improve the communication process. End with what you learned. What interviewers are looking for. Interviewers want to see whether you can admit when communication was incomplete. Take responsibility. Resolve misunderstandings professionally. Remain calm when an issue appears. Collaborate with others. Improve team processes. Prevent repeated mistakes. Communicate clearly after learning from the issue. For senior roles, they also want to see self-awareness, stakeholder management, cross-team coordination, process improvement, release and production judgment, ability to create communication standards, leadership without blame, strong words to use in your answer. You can use words like misunderstood, clarified, acknowledged, took responsibility, aligned, confirmed, documented, corrected, coordinated, followed up, improved the process, prevented recurrence, learned. Example: I acknowledged that the requirement could be interpreted differently and that I should have confirmed it earlier. I brought the relevant teams together, clarified the expected behavior, documented the decision, and introduced a checklist to prevent the same misunderstanding. Good miscommunication topics you can use. Depending on your experience, you can talk about: check, unclear API authorization requirement, front-end backend field mismatch, confusion about QA readiness, time zone assumption and reporting, sprint scope misunderstanding, external API availability, database migration ownership, ambiguous code review feedback, unclear deployment responsibility of required test coverage, confusion about feature priority, different interpretation of validation rules, unclear error response behavior, assumption about Kafka message format, misunderstanding about release timing. Final summary. Tell me about a time miscommunication caused an issue is an important interview question because misunderstandings can happen in any software team. The best answer should include: what was misunderstood, why the misunderstanding happened, what impact it caused, what responsibility you took, how you clarified the situation, how you corrected the issue, what process you changed afterward. Good examples include: yes, authorization requirement misunderstanding. Yes, API contract mismatch. Yes, QA deployment confusion. Yes, time zone calculation mismatch. Yes, sprint scope misunderstanding. Yes, cross-team dependency confusion. Yes, database migration ownership issue. Yes, ambiguous code review feedback. The strongest answers show accountability, professionalism, collaboration, quick correction, and lasting process improvement.